When we look at the structure of the Rambam in Hilchos Talmud Torah, we find something strange. He opens with the fact that the father is obligated to teach his son Torah, and he derives that from a pasuk, "V'limadatem osam es b'nechem lidaber bam." But he gives us no material substance here, no indication of how old the child is, and when does the obligation of the father emerge. But then if you fast forward to Halacha Vav, all of a sudden the Rambam, so to speak, wakes up from a dream and reminds himself, Me'emasai aviv chayav l'lamdo Torah. Mishiyaska l'daber melamdo Torah tzivalana Moshe, pasuk rishon mi parshas Kriyat Shema. V'yachkach melamdo ma'at psukim, etc. So it would seem that logically the structure would have required that the Rambam attach Halacha Vav, Me'emasai aviv chayav l'lamdo Torah, to Halacha Alef, when he says that Katan aviv chayav l'lamdo Torah. Why does he seem to delay that which should come up right up front? So we believe that the answer to that question lies in the purpose of the Rambam. The Rambam is setting up and defining all the different chiyuvim included in the mitzvah of Talmud Torah and their sources. And the first chiyuv is the father's chiyuv vis-a-vis his son, which he derives from v'limadatem osam es b'nechem. The second chiyuv is the grandfather vis-a-vis his grandson, which the Rambam derives from the pasuk datem levanecha levnei vanecha. The third chiyuv is a chacham should teach every Talmud, even though he's not his son, and that's derived from Vishinantam Levanecha. Until finally, the Rambam has the fourth chiyuv, which is the obligation of a person to teach himself Torah, which he derives from a pasuk Limadatem osam ushmartem lasosam. The next introduction of the Rambam in his overview and presentation of the laws of Talmud Torah is of these four chiyuvim, which come first, which is called the din of kedima, because in situations where he can't do both, what should get preference? So, for example, his son will get preference to his grandson if he can't teach both. His son and his grandson will get preference to somebody else's son. And finally, he himself will get preference to his son. And then the Rambam wants to know, well, there's another chiyuv to get married, and which comes first, the chiyuv to study Torah or the chiyuv to get married? So, having completed his introduction, which makes up 5 halachos, he now comes in Halacha Vav back to square one to pick up where he opened and get into the nitty-gritty details of the father's obligation to teach his son Torah. At what age does the father have to teach his son Torah? And here's where the Rambam insists that Yodea L'daber. A child who's Yodea L'daber is quite young. I'm guessing he's probably about 2 or 3 years old. And perhaps the Rambam wants to connect this shiur, this age that generates the chiyuv to teach your son Torah, to the original pasuk that he quoted in Halacha Alef to establish the chiyuv of the father, because there the Rambam went out of his way to add the two words in the pasuk v'dibarta bam. L'daber bam. L'imadatem osam esmechem l'daber bam. So the Torah adds l'daber bam to tell you that the child is capable of speaking, and the father is obligated to teach his son so that the son could speak words of Torah. But here we want to raise a different question on the Rambam. Normally, when we speak about the father's obligation vis-a-vis his young son, we call that the mitzvah of chinuch. To mention a few examples, the father has to teach his son how to shake a lulav, how to wrap himself up in tzitzis, how to put on and be careful about the kedusha of his tefillin. The father has an obligation to see to it that the child knows how to read Kriyat Shema, how to recite Birkas Hamazon, how to blow a shofar, how to go on Aliyah during the 3 Regalim when the Mikdash stood. And in all these cases, the Rambam is very consistent, and he always presents the mitzvah of chinuch, the father's obligation of chinuch. The Rambam goes out of his way to tell you that the father's obligation is midivrei sofrim. It's not d'oraisa. So why then does the Rambam omit any mention of the mitzvah of chinuch with regard to Talmud Torah? I mean, surely Talmud Torah is not less of a mitzvah than any other mitzvah. So if the Rambam delineates in various places, but over and over again, the obligation of the father to see to it that the child does the mitzvah, then in the case of Talmud Torah, the father should be making sure that his son learns Torah, which could mean, as we discussed in the past, teaching his son Torah or hiring a melamed to teach his son Torah. And the Rambam should call that chinuch. It should fit into the pattern and the umbrella of all mitzvos where the Rabbanan established chinuch. And you may recall that we mentioned, but it bears repetition, that perhaps the Rambam changes his pattern with regard to Talmud Torah because the Torah obligates the father to teach his son Torah. There's no need for the Chachamim, midivrei sofrim, to enact and generate a chiyuv of chinuch with regard to teaching Torah. That mitzvah is covered on the doraisa level before the Rabbanan step up to the plate. And it would seem to be totally superfluous for the Rabbanan to obligate the father to see to it that his son learns Torah as a mitzvah de Rabbanan of chinuch, because the Torah itself says, so therefore it makes sense that the Rambam would have omitted the word chinuch, because there is no justification for the obligation of chinuch. We don't need it. It's totally unnecessary because the Torah obligated the father to teach his son Torah. So the commentaries on the Rambam point out that we can justify in a very simple way why the Rambam omits chinuch here in the mitzvah Talmud Torah, because it's a mitzvah d'oraisa to teach your son Torah. However, they point out that the commentaries on the Rambam, like the Kesef Mishnah and the Lechem Mishnah, who took it upon themselves to find the sources in Shas for the Rambam, or Lav Dafka Shas, it could be Midrashei Halacha, and so forth and so on, they all seem to point to a brisa in Masechta Sukkah, Adaf Mem Beis. And that brisa lists the mitzvah of chinuch and the time period in which the child is ready for chinuch and obligates his father in chinuch in 4 cases, 4 mitzvahs. First in the mitzvah of lulav, then in the mitzvah of tzitzis, and finally in the mitzvah of tefillin. But the brisa doesn't stop there. Then it says the mitzvah of Talmud Torah, that the father has to teach his son Torah. Now, if the Mefarshim are bringing this brisa in Sukkah as the source for the Rambam, then applying the principle of what I call miksha achas, that there's one body here, one entity, then the brisa is giving us 4 mitzvahs of chinuch. And when the child knows how to speak, then chinuch obligates the father to teach his son Torah. Could it be, therefore, that according to these commentaries, the Rambam really holds that the mitzvah of the father to teach his son Torah is only d'Rabbanan? It's a takana of chinuch? As wild as that seems, there is one commentary, to the best of my knowledge, who explicitly puts this into the Rambam. And he reads the Rambam as telling us that although the katan is pater from the mitzvah of Talmud Torah, but yet the father is obligated in chinuch vis-a-vis the mitzvah of Talmud Torah in the case of his son who's young. And in fact, according to this explanation, the Rambam is very consistent, meaning his style repeats itself without exception. The Rambam will tell you that a katan is pater from shofar, but let him blow the shofar. The Rambam will tell you he's pater from tzitzis, let him wear tzitzis. Obligation of chinuch. And in lulav, and in sukkah, and in tefillin, and in, as we mentioned before, aliyah l'regel, over and over again, the Rambam starts by telling you that the katan is pater for the mitzvah, but we have an obligation to be mechanik the katan. And therefore, the Rambam here at the beginning of Hilchas Talmud Torah, according to this Mishnah Kesef, is following his general pattern. The structure repeats itself consistently. And the Rambam opens up Hilchas Talmud Torah by telling us that Ketanim are pater from Talmud Torah, but the father, insofar as he's obligated in chinuch, is obligated to teach his son Torah. But then the question begs itself, what does the Rambam mean by saying Shenemar v'limadet mosam es b'nechem? He derives from scriptures the obligation of the father. It's not a takana that was established by the Rabbanan to create a chiyuv on the father. And here's where the Mishnah Kesef pulls a fast one on us, so to speak, and he says that the Rambam means an asmachta. This is not a full-fledged derivation of the simple pshat in the pasuk, but rather an asmachta. This is where the Rabbanan, find in the Torah some sort of an allusion, a hint to their takana, but at the end of the day, it's takana of chinuch. Now, I would like to take a stab at this and quote a Rambam that seems to indicate that the mitzvah of chinuch does apply, in fact, in Talmud Torah. And for that, we fast forward to Perek Beis Hilchos Talmud Torah. And the Rambam writes that the child should be taught Torah not just during the daylight hours, but also at nighttime. So let me read to you the language of the Rambam. It says, Yoshev v'lamdam kol hayom kulu u'miktas min alayla k'dei lechancham lilmod bayom u'balayla. Look at those words, k'dei lechancham. The Rambam clearly indicates that there's a chiyuv of chinuch vis-a-vis the child, and therefore we have to teach him into the night, which is okay during the winter. I don't know in the summer in this part of the world exactly how you're going to do that, but that's a logistical question. And I'm tempted to think that if we're not willing to go as far as the Mishnah Kesef and assume that the Rambam in Perek Alef Halacha Alef is talking about a chiyuv d'Rabbanan, and the pasuk quoted by the Rambam is only nismachta, that far we're not going to go. But we will establish a mitzvah of chinuch d'Rabbanan in Talmud Torah. What does that mean? When the child is yodel ledaber, very young tat, the Torah obligates the father to teach his son psukim in the Torah. Starts with Torah Tzivilon Moshe, and then he goes to Shema Yisrael, and then psukim. When the child is capable at an older age of really studying Torah, not just, parroting the words, then the mitzvah of chinuch kicks in. And therefore, as such, we have to teach the child into the night. Because the Torah says, V'gisa bo yomam v'layla. And this, I think, my friends, will touch on an issue which is addressed by the Alter Rebbe of Chabad in his Kuntres of Hilchos Talmud Torah. And that is there any significance to reading psukim in the Torah without understanding them? So like we indicated before, the child is very young, 2 or 3, capable perhaps of parroting his father. It's like a parrot, mimicking or repeating the words of his father. Doesn't understand them. Later down the line, he gets a little bit older, more mature. He has wisdom. He has capability of understanding the Torah. So the Alter Rebbe claims that there is a mitzvah of reading psukim in the Torah, even in the absence of understanding them. The Rambam might be indicating that when he says that Me'emasai chayav ada aviv l'lamdo Torah mi sheyodeh l'daber mi. Right? What's the language here again? Mishiyascha l'daber. The Rambam is not saying that the child is old enough to understand the Torah, but rather old enough to read the psukim in the Torah. Therefore, we teach him psukim. And Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky, Zichrono Livrocha, in his Emes Yaakov, has an introduction. And in that introduction, he says that the Gemara in Masechta Shabbos derives from one word in the pasuk that Torah equals mikra. And Rashi says mikra means reading psukim in the Torah. Says Rav Yaakov that reading the psukim itself is a mitzvah of Talmud Torah. And not only that, Rav Yaakov gives a little bit of almost a quasi-philosophical explanation to this halacha. What significance is there to mouthing words of Torah that you don't understand? And he quotes a Gemara in Brachos that says that the entire Torah B'chsav was dictated by HaKadosh Baruch Hu himself to Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu was the stenographer. He wrote the Torah, but it was really the words of Hashem. So there's some inherent significance to the words of the Torah. That's only true for Torah Sheb'chsav. Torah Sheb'al Peh, there's no significance to the words other than to convey and transmit a message and understand what's being said. So that in Torah Sheb'al Peh, and this you'll find also the Alter Rebbe, if you don't understand what you're reading, you read Mishnayos, but it's like Chinese to you, then you don't get any brownie points for that. There's no kiyum mitzvah. It's meaningless. Now, I was wondering in the light of this introduction to Emes Yaakov, what about Nevi'im and Ksuvim? And I'm tempted to think that in Nevi'im and Ksuvim, you have to understand what you're reading. Otherwise, it's meaningless. Why? Because, when we speak about Chamisha Chumshei Torah that were given as a dictation from the Almighty straight to the ears of Moshe Rabbeinu, that gives significance to the words themselves. But Nevi'im and Ksuvim are the words of the Nevi'im and those who are endowed with Ruach HaKodesh, but they're not the words of Hashem. And I'll prove it to you, because the Gemara says, Ein Shnei Nevi'im Misnabim V'Signon Echad. You can't have two different Nevi'im that will present their Nevuah in the same style. Because in Nevuah, the formulation of the Nevuah and the Nusach HaNevuah is all subjective. It's all a reflection of that particular Navi. So that's an interesting question, because it comes up with regard to Tehillim. People are reading Tehillim, they don't understand what they're reading, they just read it by rote, that's all. Is that a mitzvah? Tehillim is not part of Chamisha Chumshei Torah, obviously. So I don't know, but leave that on the side. We might have now two interpretations of the Rambam. One interpretation, which I call the revolutionary interpretation, that of the Mishnah Kesef, is that the Rambam is referring to the mitzvah of Chinuch. A less radical approach would be our intuitive reading of the Rambam, that the chiyuv of the father vis-a-vis his son's Torah is doraisa. There's no chinuch to add to a doraisa. But when the child gets old enough to understand Torah, then we have an obligation of chinuch to teach him Torah not just by day, but by night as well. And that's what the Rambam's language was, as we saw in Perek Beis, kedei lechancho, that we want to educate him to learn Torah at night, not just by day. Now, I want to ask you the following question. It may sound very abstract, but we'll try it. And it's all an iyun and a delving into the shita of the Rambam with regard to chinuch. Here's my question. Are you ready for this? What I'm asking is, did the Rabbanan establish a mitzvah of chinuch, all-inclusive, a general mitzvah of chinuch, and now we apply it for every single mitzvah, or no? The Rabbanan established a separate chiyuv of chinuch for every single mitzvah. And my proof of the pudding for that second approach, that every mitzvah had its own unique takana by the Chachamim, is derived from the fact that the Rambam doesn't say v'chayav ha'adam lechancho lechanech esbanav lemitzvos. No. The Rambam in every single mitzvah spells out the mitzvah of chinuch. Now, as you know, the Rambam is very stingy on ink. He doesn't have lengthy discussions when he could collapse it into one succinct, short sentence. Aviv chayav lechancho b'mitzvahs, period. Why does he have to go ahead in each mitzvah and spell out that there's a chiyuv of chinuch? Wasting a lot of ink. Now, you'll ask me the following question. Why would the Rabbanan feel compelled? What pushes them to establish a mitzvah of chinuch for every single mitzvah unto itself? Well, why would they do such a thing? And I believe the answer to that is that the Rabbanan established a unique mitzvah of chinuch for every single mitzvah. You cannot compare one chinuch to another chinuch. Let me give you examples. In the mitzvah of lulav, you might have assumed, we have a principle in Hilchos Lulav called mid'ag bei nofik bei. You just have to lift up the daled minim from the table, from the ground, that we should set the shear of chinuch when the child is capable of netilas lulav. No. And the Rambam formulates this in Hilchos Lulav, that we don't have to obligate the child until the child is capable of nanuin, which is the most sophisticated and complete mitzvah of shlemus of netilas lulav. Not just mira'ag be nafik be, the child's capable of picking up a lulav, he's 5 years old, he's 3 years old, but rather he's capable of doing nanuim. Nanuim are very complicated. Or, for example, when the Rambam speaks about tzitzis, he doesn't just say, well, the child is able to be lovesh tzitzis, and therefore he's igia l'shas chinu, but rather the child is able to be misatef b'tzitzis, because the complete level of the mitzvah is ituf b'tzitzis, which we fulfill with the talis gadol, not the talis kotel. And when the Rambam gets to tefillin, the highest level of mitzvah's tefillin is yodel lishmar es tefillah. He's very careful in protecting his tefillin so that they don't get desecrated, because the kedusha of tefillin is a great kedusha. The Rambam writes that the kedusha of tefillin is like that of the tzitz that's worn on the head of the Kohen Gadol. It's interesting that with regard to shofar, the Rabbanu were misaken that we help the child blow the shofar as a chinuch, even in a case where Rosh Hashanah falls on Shabbos. Rosh Hashanah overlaps with Shabbos, then there's an Isa Shvus of blowing any musical instrument, including a shofar. But for the sake of chinuch, we're going to override that Shvus. With regard to, for example, the mitzvah v'nisam es nafshel seichem, there's a very intricate set of halachas of chinuch. When the child reaches 10, he does shows. If it's a girl, then at 11, she's already fasting the whole day. And for a boy, when he's 12, and so forth and so on. These are all details in the laws of chinuch for the mitzvah of tainus of Yom Kippur. In Sukkah, for example, the age of Sukkah, of Higia L'chinuch for Sukkah, is when he Eino Tzarch L'imo. He's not, so to speak, attached to his mother. For Aliyah L'regel, the halacha is it's not enough that the child can sit piggyback on his father's shoulders when his father takes him up to Yerushalayim, to the Harabayis, but he's got to be capable of walking to the Harabayis when the father just holds his hand. So we see clearly that every single mitzvah has its own unique, I call it the mechanics of chinuch. It's not just one, mikshachas, just one formula for all the mitzvahs. Every mitzvah has its own unique demands, requirements, and standards for chinuch. And in fact, I'll go a step further. The Rambam, if you go through all the dinim and the mitzvahs of chinuch as they are, you will find that the Rambam has 3 categories about who's obligated in chinuch. In certain mitzvahs, like tefillin, for example, or mezuzah, the Rambam says it's the father who is obligated to teach his son. In other mitzvahs, the Rambam says the son has the obligation of chinuch to be mechanech himself. For example, the Rambam has in Hilchas brachos, with regard to Birkas Hamazon, that the child himself is obligated through chinuch in the mitzvah of Birkas Hamazon. And the nafkamina is, the Rambam says that the child, if the child ate a full kibbetz's worth of lechem, then he could be motzi a gadol who only ate kizayis of lechem. Obviously, if the child is being motzi his friend, it must be that the child is obligated, because if he's not obligated, la bar chiyuva, he can't be motzi anyone else. And I believe that there are other cases in which the Rambam obligates the son to fulfill the mitzvah. So we now understand why the Rambam has to go through every single mitzvah and its obligation of chinuch imposed upon the father because of those unique halachos that apply to each mitzvah. And in fact, that's what we're saying, that the Rabbanu were mitaking a new takana for each mitzvah. Now, if you take the case of Talmud Torah, according to the Mefarshim, which I think represent the general understanding, common understanding, accepted understanding of the Rambam, then the Torah obligates the father to teach his son Torah, Mishiyadeh L'daber. Does it make sense within the framework of chinuch? The answer is absolutely not. Because a child at the age of 2 or 3, although he's capable of enunciating the words, he has no havana. He doesn't understand the word. So he's not on the highest level of shleimus hamitzvah, like in the case of lulav, where he knows how to do nanuim, or the case of tzitzis, where he knows how to do ituv. In the case of tefillin, we said he has the highest level, that he's shomer's tefillah. This child is far from being at the highest level of Talmud Torah. He's really at the basic level, but that's what the Torah obligates. So it doesn't fit into the pattern of chinuch, but it doesn't have to fit into the pattern of chinuch, because we're now talking about a mitzvah d'oraisa. The Torah is going to legislate when the father is obligated to teach his son Torah, and that's l'daber ba mishiyadeh l'daber. Had the Rabbanan instituted chinuch for Torah, then I dare say that chinuch would only apply when the child is a little bit older, maybe 6, maybe 7, and he's capable of understanding the Torah. That's the real shleimus hamitzvah. So the parallel to ituf in tzitzis, or to nanuim in lulav, or yodel lishmar es tefillah in Talmud Torah would be havanas haTorah. And in fact, the Rambam writes that you're teaching your son psukim until the child reaches the age of ben sheish or ben sheva, hakol lefi burio. It depends on the health of the child, the maturity of the child, but basically he's 6 or 7 years old. At that point, the father has a mitzvah of teaching his son, and this could be chinuch. Here we can really inject chinuch into the Rambam, although he doesn't mention the word chinuch explicitly until he gets to Perek Beis, when he talks about teaching the child at night. But this might be a mitzvah of chinuch. I don't know. If it's a mitzvah of chinuch, then at the age of 6 or 7, the child is capable of reaching the shleimus hamitzvah, parallel to what we discussed with regard to lulav, tzitzis, and sefer and tefillin, and therefore the Rabbanan could institute chinuch. But again, I have to insist that the Rambam omits the word chinuch, so it's a bit difficult. More likely, the Rambam is saying that the Torah imposes b'chiv on the father as long as the child is a katan. If he's up to the age of 6, then teach him psukim. If he's past the age of 6, teach him Torah, meaning Torah shebechsav and Torah shebal peh, interpretations, commentaries, halachos. And if the father doesn't have the time or the ability to do so, let him hire a malamed tinokos and bring the child to a malamed tinokos. So in sum, we could say that there are 2 ways of going in the Rambam. One way is to approach these Rambams from the perspective of chinuch, and that's the approach of the Mishnah Kesef. And the other way is the way we intuitively understand the Rambam, and that is that this is the mitzvah d'oraisa imposed upon the father, and it starts when l'daber upon the child is yodei l'daber. Joe?
Just wondering, with regards to the Rav was talking about teaching him how to speak. You couldn't say that, and him reading the psukim when he doesn't understand it, that's part of that's definitely chinuch. In other words,
Right. That's what we're saying. There are two interpretations. One interpretation is to say that when he reads the words, that's chinuch.
because he doesn't know what it means yet. So,
He
and
doesn't know
Talmud
what it
Torah
means, but there's
means,
some sort of mitzvah of chinuch. It's very strange to
right? No,
start
no.
with chinuch at that age, but chinuch. And the other approach is to say, no, the Torah says, forget about chinuch. Chinuch is the Rabbanon, it's a takana. The Torah says that you have to teach your son Torah, let him enunciate the words. There's a kiyum of Talmud Torah, as we saw in the name of the Alter Rebbe, even without Havana. And that kiyum is reading psukim in the Torah, and that's meaningful, and that's a kiyum of mitzvah, even if you don't understand it. And the father is therefore obligated to do so, minat Torah. But you could explain the Rambam, as we saw in the Mishnah Kesef, as referring to China. And then the whole institution here is all the Rabbanon. And the Rabbanon said that although in other mitzvahs we usually wait until the child is more mature and capable of doing the mitzvah at its perfect stage, and before that we don't have an obligation of chinuch. But in the case of Torah, we're going to accept the fact that there's chinuch on the lowest level, because that lowest level is also a cheftzah shel Torah, a kiyum of mitzvahs Talmud Torah, of kriya b'psukim, as we saw in the name of Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky. It's mikra, and mikra is kriya, and there's a meaningful and significant act of kriya with regard to Torah Shebichsav, and that's what you have to do as a father to train your child in that mitzvah. Get the child to read the psukim, and it's interesting that the Rambam says psukim. You might have said osios, maybe. If Rav Yaakov Kamenetsky is right that the significance to the Torah insofar it was dictated to Moshe Rabbeinu from Mipi Elyon, then maybe we should talk about osios, or at least talk about tevos. Tevos means words, but no, the Rambam says psukim, and the Rambam holds that again. If we go with the approach of chinuch of the Mishnah Kesef, then the Rambam holds that chinuch means giving him a unit of words that form a whole that has a meaning and a significance. Because if you have just flying in midair words, that really doesn't have any meaning, doesn't tell you anything. You need a beginning, a middle, and an end. So you need psukim. And that's why I think the Rambam emphasizes psukim. Of course, you could ask me, if the Rambam is talking about a mitzvah doraisa, why does he begin with Torah Tziva Lanu Moshe, Shema Yisrael? On the other hand, even if I grant you that the Rambam is talking about the mitzvah of chinuch, which is only the Rabbanon, what are you teaching him? Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu? That's one pasuk. The Ram paskins in Hilchos Kriyat Shema that you're not yotze the mitzvah of Kriyat Shema unless you read 3 parshios. So why don't we impose a chi of chinuch on the father when the child is capable of reading all 3 parshios, which is the shleimus ha-mitzvah, similar to what we saw with regard to tzitzis, tefillin, and lulav.
You can't say it's like a building. It's a build. That's a whole concept. No,
Yeah, I
you,
guess, look,
you,
in lulav also you could build up, but that's not called chinuch, meaning I can buy a lemon for my child.
yeah, we're not.
And,
Yeah,
in a palm, just grab a palm branch. It's not a lulav. And, get the child to just do the action. Okay, there might be something significant there. Lahargilo, we call it. Lahargilo means hergil. Get him into the shvur, get him used to it. It's like a sportsman. He has to do exercises. But that's not chinuch. If it were chinuch, then the mitzvah of tzitzis would apply as soon as the child's able to put his head into the tzitzis. And the mitzvah of tefillin would apply as soon as the child is able to put the tefillin on his hand and on his head. And the mitzvah of lulav would apply as soon as he lifts the lulav. We don't need all the sophisticated, complicated nanuim. But that's not true. Again, I'm not saying it's meaningless. You want to get the child, into it, prepare him, and it's an exercise of hergil. I'm not denying that, but it's not chinuch. Chinuch has shiurim. The Rabbanan required chinuch when the child reaches a certain stage, and he's reach the stage where he could achieve the mitzvah b'shleimus, not just, put the tefillin on his head, not just, put his head through the hole of the tzitzis, or pick up a lulav. No, that's not chinuch. Chinuch is when the mitzvah is done exactly the way it should be done in its optimum form by a gadol. The child is capable of imitating the gadol in doing the mitzvah in the proper way. So therefore, again, pasuk rishon shel kriyat shema would not be chinuch, according to everything we're saying. So there's no way, no how that I'm willing to accept the Mishnah Kesef's understanding of the Rambam, that the Rambam is talking about the chiyuv of the father to teach his son Torah as chinuch. It's not chinuch. Chinuch would be if the child is capable of reading all three parashiyos of Kriyat Shema. But teaching him one pasuk, again, please don't misunderstand me. I'm not trying to be cynical. Yeah, teaching one pasuk is a nice start, but it doesn't go around all four bases. It's not chinuch. Chinuch means when you can do it as it should be done by a gadol. In other words, the child is basically taught to perform a mitzvah, which if you look at, take a video of the child doing that mitzvah, if he would have been bar mitzvah, that would have been the way that we would taught it, that we would expect him to do the mitzvah. Exactly identical. Anything less would be meaningful as hergel. Get him used to it. But it's not chinuch. Chinuch means we want the child to implement and duplicate the mitzvah as if he were a gadol. B'shleimus ha-mitzvah, the proper and perfect way a gadol would perform the mitzvah. And we gave 3 examples. We gave an example from lulav, tzitzis, and tefillin. And don't forget those examples. That's critical. That's the point I want to make over here. So one pasuk of Kriyat Shema is not chinuch. And therefore I'm tempted to believe, as the general commentaries believe in the Rambam, that the Rambam holds that the mitzvah of the father, mishiyodel l'daber, when the child is capable of speaking without understanding, that is a mitzvah d'oraisa. The Torah says that that's what the father is obligated to do. It's a special halacha in Talmud Torah, that reading psukim in the Torah is meaningful, and therefore the father becomes obligated to see to it that he teaches his son how to read these psukim, and that's the kickoff of the father's obligation under the pasuk v'limadatem osam esmechem. You'll ask me, so why did the Rambam delay any discussion about Yodel l'daber until halacha vav? That we had a long discussion. You'll also ask me, but what about this mitzvah of chinuch that the Rambam has in Perek Beis to teach the child at night? So I'll be honest with you. I don't know that the Rambam's intention in Perek Beis is to address the obligation of the father. I'll tell you what Perek Beis is about. Perek Beis is about melamdei tinokos. There's an entire chapter here, Perek Beis of Hilchos Talmud Torah, that's dedicated to the laws of melamdei. Not all these halachas make sense for us today. For example, the Rambam writes about a melamed that maka osam ha-melamed lahatil aleim eimu. Take the staff. Okay, the Rambam goes on to say don't hit him with, cruelty. But today, I don't know, in the laws of the land, at least, I don't think you're allowed to hit the child. Or, for example, the Rambam writes that if the child would have to cross a river to get from one side of the city to the other side of the city, then you have to guarantee that there be another melamed on the other side of the river to service those who live on that side of the river. Or, for example, the Rambam writes, if a city doesn't set up a melamdei tinokes, I should say, not a, but many melamdei tinokes, depending upon the size of the city and the shkunot and so forth and so on, then the Rambam writes something unbelievable. The Rambam writes, machrivim es ha'ir. You got to destroy the city. Wow. It's like it's like Ira Nidachas almost. So in Perek Beis, the Rambam establishes the laws that apply to Malamdei Tinokos, what they have to do, what they cannot do. And in that context, the Rambam says that the Malamdei Tinokos was given another job amongst the many jobs that he has. He's not just a babysitter. And he's going to have to teach the child into the night. And that chinuch is imposed and incumbent upon the Malamdei Tinokos in the Misgeret, in the framework of Dinei Malamdei Tinokos. So at this point, the father is out of the picture. Halacha in Perek Alef, the first 7 halachas, the father is center stage. Once we get to Malamdei Tinokos in Perek Beis, the father has, so to speak, disappeared into the shadows of the night. He's no longer, front row. So to say that the Rambam requires chinuch in Talmud Torah based on Perek Beis, I am skeptical. I would say that chinuch in Perek Beis has to do with the takana of Malamdei Tinokos, that every city needs Malamdei Tinokos, and these are the laws. These are the rules and the regulations of Malamdei Tinokos. Okay, I think we'll stop here. We covered quite a bit. I just want to look quickly at my page that I gave out, and David was kind enough to circulate it. Whether or not I'm missing any point that I wanted to discuss with you, just give me a second. No, I think we covered it all. Okay, then. So let me take this opportunity to thank you and wish you a great week. And for myself, a mazel tov. We have Shev Brachas of Shabbos. We're having everybody come to our apartment here in our Nof. And the Mitzvah Hashem, it'll be a simcha. Great.
Man.
Both.